to start digging into the guts of the Korg DW-8000 and figuring out how it works. What I'd like to focus on is kind of what makes this synth different than other synths of its time period and even today. And we're going to start on the thing that kind of creates or controls what sound is even being generated, which are the oscillators. If you don't know what oscillators are, basically they're the electrical components that create the sound inside of a synthesizer. For your classic analog synthesizers, you might have a choice of a few different waveforms. Waveforms are just basically the modes of an oscillator, and if you change the waveform, it'll change the kind of sound that you get. So on a classic analog synthesizer, you might have something like a sawtooth, and you might have something like a sine wave. Same pitch, just two different very different ways of creating the sound, so they sound different, obviously. But in addition to that, you might have, a square wave, a triangle wave. They both have their own unique sounds. But usually you would only have a choice of 4 or 5 different oscillator types. The oscillators on the Korg DW-8000, they're not analog, they are digital. But you do have a choice of 16 different waveforms, including the two I just showed you, the sawtooth and the sine wave, as well as 14 others for 16 total. What I like about this controller patch here is it gives us the names of the different oscillator types, and essentially what I think Korg was trying to do here is they're giving us more complex waveforms than a typical analog synthesizer would generate, and the idea is it gives us the ability to create more complex sounds. So I'll give you a taste of what these sound like. Like I mentioned, you've got regular sawtooth, you've got clarinet, acoustic piano, electric piano, harder electric piano, clavie, organ, brass, saxophone, violin, acoustic guitar, distorted electric guitar, electric bass. Maybe I have to go down one. Digital bass, bell sounds, and as I mentioned before, a sine wave. This controller patch has pictures of each waveform, which is the same pictures that you'll see on the front of the actual synthesizer. It gives you an idea what they look like. In addition to selecting the waveform, of course, you control its level, and you control what octave it's in. I have on my Ableton here a little signal analyzer. And basically what this is doing is working like an old school oscilloscope, so it's giving a visual representation of what the sounds are doing. And using these kinds of waveforms here, you can see live in real time the different more complex waveforms you can get. But so far I've only focused on oscillator 1. We have a whole other oscillator here that we can play with, and that's where things get more interesting. So if I set to the same waveform and bring it up, we can have 2 different waveforms to choose from, and of course on each waveform we can control what octave it's in. We can control the waveform it's using. You can also control the level of detune. So basically this knob here takes the pitch of each oscillator and kind of pulls them apart so their pitch is slightly different. You can get almost a kind of chorusing effect with that. It can make patches sound kind of bigger and wider and fatter and all that. In addition to just slightly detuning them from each other, we have an interval command, which snaps them to a certain interval between the pitches. So, for example, when it's on 1, they're just on unison, same exact pitch. When it's -3, they're detuned from each other and snap to a minor third. When it's on 3, they're snapped to a major third. When it's on 4, they're on a fourth. When it's on 5, they're on a fifth. And you can still detune them from each other, even when they were on an interval. And then play around with what octave and what waveform. And the reason why I want to show you this signal analyzer is, as I play around with these different waveform types, I think it's nice to look at because we can see what all the changes that we're doing on the actual patch is doing to the sound of the pure oscillators that are coming through. Again, this is just the oscillators. I'm not using any envelopes, really. I'm not using any filter. It's all just the oscillators. So let's play around a little bit and see the kind of unique waveforms we can get. So even without using any filters or modulation or envelopes, I'm able to get a lot of movement and kind of phasing, interesting interactions between the two complex waveforms we can use. It's nice when all this movement and motion is happening right where the sound is being generated, and it makes it, I think, creative, and you can work from there. Now, again, as I've mentioned a few times, because of the way this is set up, few things. Number one, you'll notice all these different names: acoustic piano, electric piano, violin. Now, we can take a listen to the violin again. Does that really sound like a violin? I don't know about that. Does this really sound like an acoustic guitar? That's pretty far away from an acoustic guitar sound. But I think that's okay. I don't think that when Korg designed this, they were trying to make something that's going to, completely replicate the sound of an acoustic guitar or a violin or a piano. If you want that kind of thing, there are plenty of workstation keyboards to choose from that use samples and are romplers, and that's what they're designed to do. I think the idea here is that they're just trying to give us, take certain instrument sounds as inspiration and use that inspiration to create complex waveforms, allow us to mix and match those waveforms together to create new sounds. As I've said a couple times, although there's a couple analog type sounds, it's going to be, because these are digital oscillators, it's going to be hard to make someone mistake them for a Moog or a Pt.3 or something like that. But we already got to see how unique the sounds can get when we mix the oscillators together. So maybe we don't always need a Moog or an oscillator, or a Pt.3. This is just a different kind of sounding synthesizer. something nice to have in your arsenal, I think. In addition to all these oscillator controls up here, we've got a noise generator. You can add it in if you want to just have a kind of a spacier sound. Or you make it extreme if you are working with like percussive sounds. I won't spend too much time on that. In addition, you've got something that's really unique is your auto bend function. So what this is essentially doing is it's telling your oscillators when you hit a note to bend up or bend down to the note that's actually going to. So I'll do it for both to kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about. You've got an intensity control and a time control. So just to give you a taste of what it sounds like. Right now, this is telling both oscillators to bend up to the pitch that I played on my keyboard. If I increase the intensity, it makes it more noticeable. If I take it down, it's less noticeable. If I change the time, it could happen faster or slower, even very slowly. So slowly that the sustain runs out before the time does. You can do that with just one oscillator, or just the other. Sometimes it's tough to see how you would use that if you're just working with an initial patch. So let me bring up a different patch for you to show you what I'm talking about. So right now, these are set to both bend down. Let me turn up the intensity and the time some so you can hear it. Turn up the keyboard a little bit. Okay. Kind of dramatic sounds, right? You can change it so so just one is doing it. Just the other. Control the intensity. Control the time. Okay, that's enough of that. You can see you can get some just subtle to very extreme sounds with that. Another thing I think is interesting is over here you've got the bend section, which basically controls, you'll remember in the first video I showed that joystick to the left-hand side where you can do pitch bends. This controls how much the stick controls the pitch. So I'm messing with my pitch wheel right now. When it's about midway, changes the pitch as I move the wheel up and down. When it's slight, it only moves the pitch a little bit, but when I move it way up, it controls the pitch a lot. A lot of oscillators, or excuse me, a lot of synthesizers have this function, but in addition, one thing I think is interesting is they've added on the ability to change the filter cutoffs. So as I move my pitch wheel, actually let me close the filter a little bit so you can hear what I'm doing. The very bottom of my pitch is closed, and as I move up it gets brighter. So just another sort of interesting, I haven't really seen another synth that I know of necessarily map cutoff to pitch like this, so I think that's interesting. In addition to that, I've got a portamento feature. Let me pull up a different patch to show you this. Portamento is what's sometimes referred to as glide, and it basically controls the time it takes to move from one note to the other. So when it's at 0, it takes no time, and one note just snaps to the other. When you move it up, it takes a little bit longer. When you move it up all the way, it takes a long time. So you can imagine combining all these together, you can get really unique sounds. So again, this is a unique sounding synthesizer, which I think is what makes it so great. It doesn't sound like others, and it's got these sort of unique oscillator and pitch changing functions here that I haven't found in other synthesizers. In the next videos, we're going to talk about what makes the envelopes so unique and how we can use them to control the sounds. Again, thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.